Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 31st of May, 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. It's May, Mike, and I think we should bring her in because she can't refuse the money. It's just astonishing that the Tories, of course, have been going for Russia every minute of every day for the last, whatever it is, year nearly. And those nasty Russians, but she's taking more money. So here we've got another 100,000 come in. The article says the Labour Party has accused Theresa May of breaking her promises and continuing business as usual with Russia after the Conservative Party accepted another 100,000 donation from the wife of a former minister in Vladimir Putin's government. So they go on to talk about some of the sums of money, but it's about 4.7 million now come in to the Tories, and this particular Russian source, they're bringing the total amount £626,500 since 2012. So there's one set of rules for the public. The nasty Russians, they are the threat. They're going to invade the country. They're doing terrible things in Syria. But if it's Russian money, what can we do but accept it?
Indeed. Well, the BBC are the latest mainstream media publication organisation to print a positive profile of George Soros. They seem to feel that this is necessary. This follows Channel 4 earlier in the year. Snopes has been doing a whole bunch of stuff on George Soros and so on, but they have published this profile, billionaire philanthropist George Soros. They start off by saying that Hungarian-American businessman George Soros is one of the world's most renowned and philanthropic financial investors. Earning his fortune through shrewd financial speculation, he has spent millions of his own money funding human rights projects and liberal democratic ventures around the world. In recent years, that funding has made him a target of the world's nationalists and populists, who have painted him as a master manipulator of democracy. Much of the criticism aimed at the 87-year-old has been criticised as having anti-Semitic overtones, of course. And they talk about his early years, the fact that he was born in 1930 in Budapest to a Jewish lawyer father, that he and his family survived the Hungarian Nazi occupation by splitting up and acquiring forged papers and disguising their religion. And then he emigrated to England. And they say nothing about his, some people call it collaboration, but his activities while he was in occupied Hungary. And, many people, including Snopes, trying to debunk the suggestions that Soros was a collaborator of some sort. And of course, there is rubbish about Soros out there suggesting that he was a member of the SS, which clearly he couldn't possibly have been because he was only 14 at the time, and this kind of stuff. But nonetheless, it is important to look at what he has said in his own words. Now, the often cited interview was the 60 Minutes interview when he said that it really started in 1944 when Hungary was occupied by the Germans, and me being Jewish, I was in danger of life. When the Germans came, Soros's father said, this is a lawless occupation, the normal rules don't apply, you have to forget how you behave in a normal society, this is an abnormal situation, and he arranged for all of them to have false papers. Everyone had a different arrangement, and George was adopted by an official of the Ministry of Agriculture whose job it was to take over Jewish properties. And so George went with this official, and we took possession of these large estates. That was my identity, so it was a very strange life. But that was what he said in that interview. But when he was writing the introduction to his father's book, he said a little bit more. He said that these were the happiest days of his life. He said it's a sacrilegious thing to say, but these 10 months during the Nazi occupation, were the happiest times of my life. We led an adventurous life and we had fun together. So, the criticism, of Soros, the suggestion that he was a Nazi collaborator may be a bit strong because he was only 14 at the time, but nonetheless, this seems to have been a formative period of his life, and it says a lot about his mindset in subsequent years. Now, the BBC in their article go on to talk about the fact that he became this great hedge fund manager. He made billions. He made £1 billion alone from trying to destroy the British pound in the night, on Black Wednesday. And of course, since then, he's set up open society foundations all over the world, which, well, what do they do, Brian? Do they not interfere with democracy in other countries and other systems of government?
They absolutely interfere with democracy, and of course, huge amounts of money. The last figure I saw in relation to the wider structure around open society was $1.9 billion, which is being used to interfere in democracy in other nation states, and he's done this over a great many years. So I think this is the BBC attempting to come to his rescue, because it's clear that people over the wider internet are seeing through this man and his trusts and his charities and his so-called democratic organisations. I think he needs to be gently put out to pasture, and we should be allowing nation states to get on running their own democracies without George Soros.
Absolutely, and I'll just say that any suggestion that criticism of an individual and his actions are anti-Semitic, when the focus is on his actions, not on what he is, that is simply an effort to shut down the criticism.
Yeah, shut down free speech is actually what it is, Mike.
Absolutely. So let's look at that. Now, we haven't really mentioned this before. This is the directive of the European Parliament and of the Council on copyright in the digital single market. And there's quite a lot of stuff on the internet, going around the internet at the moment, about particularly Section 13 of this, or Article 13 of this, rather. Now, the so-called European Digital Single Market Directive on Copyright was published in 2016. It's heading its way through the legislative process of the European Union at the moment. And there are actually two main features of this that I think it's not just Article 13 that we need to be looking at here, it's also Article 11. Because Article 11 is a link tax, effectively, is how many people are describing it, in favour of news publishers. We'll come on to that in a second. And then Article 13 is the global filtering of content which is being uploaded to internet platforms. So a bit of background to this. The original European Copyright Directive was enacted in 2001. It's significantly out of date now. And then Julia Reda, who was an MEP for the Pirate Party, began some work to try to update the Copyright Directive, and she did some quite useful work. That was submitted in a report to the European Parliament in 2015, but the European Commission didn't like that very much. They got rid of much of the work that she had done, and they put this proposal that's on screen at the moment out in October 2016, and it's this that's been making progress since. It's been in front of several committees of the European Parliament. The Parliament's Legal Affairs Committee is taking the lead on it, and the final text has to be accepted by the European Council. Now, of course, there are lots of names here: European Commission, European Parliament, European Council. This just is a great example of how ridiculous the European Union is. But the European Council has the final say on this, and that is the heads of government, and Donald Tusk is the president of that. So the Council is aware of a lot of the criticism of this. Donald Tusk aware of a lot of the criticism of this. They have put forward compromise proposals. That's how they're describing them. But in fact, the compromise proposals are pretty much exactly the same as what's in this European Commission document. So let's look at Article 11, because this is all about links on the internet. Now, the whole point of the World Wide Web is that it's based on the idea of the hyperlink, that your document on the web contains links to other documents which provide supporting information and so on. And any attempt to subvert the idea of the hyperlink on the World Wide Web really pulls the foundations out from the whole thing. And this is something which has been discussed over many, many years, and up to now has been considered to be a very bad idea. But the Article 11 of this new directive proposes a link tax, which establishes a special fee, a copyright fee, for news publishers, so The Guardian, The Times, the rest, in exchange for the privilege of using a piece of text with a link which links back to the original article. Now, the key point about this, what makes this particularly dangerous, is that the latest amendments to this are making Article 11 an inalienable right. And what this means is that if you are a publisher of some kind and you would choose to opt out of this particular article, actually that would be in breach of the law. It would be a legal requirement for you to charge money for people to link back to your content, and you would have no choice about that. So this is particularly insidious, because particularly if you're in alternative media, for example, because we're quite often linking back to other websites and news websites. And indeed, the very question of whether we could take a screenshot of an article on a news website and then discuss it in the way that we do from time to time, this would probably be illegal at that point. So this is a massive problem of free speech, but it doesn't end there, because of course this is also followed up by Article 13, which is this notion of an automated filter for all content which is being uploaded to the internet. Now, what I've got on screen there, of course, is an image of somebody with a mobile phone looking at a YouTube icon. And YouTube has had this notion for quite some time. It's called Content ID. Anybody that's posted information to YouTube or posted videos to YouTube may occasionally have come a cropper of the Content ID system and ended up with a copyright strike on their video. It's a very common thing. And YouTube has the process of algorithmically identifying material that allegedly belongs to other people, and they flag your video straight away. Sometimes they block your video straight away, depending on the type of agreement that they have with the original or the copyright owner. So this apparently is being in place to address the idea that there's what they call a value gap between money that streaming media platforms make and the money which is given to the actual content owners themselves, songwriters, singers, songwriters, these types of people. But the problem is that the way that this is written, not surprisingly, actually captures a whole range of types of content. This is not just about audio or even video content. It's all kinds of content. So it also applies to all kinds of hosting providers, for example, cloud storage, or if you host a website yourself, or you host a blog yourself. And for example, the wording in the Act says, store and provide to the public access. Now this implies that your hosting provider becomes a publisher, and that they would be liable for all infringements. And of course, what that means is your hosting provider then becomes the policeman, and they have to put this system in place to police what you're uploading to your own website. And so many people recognizing that this is going to have, well, I've seen one person calling it a chilling effect on freedom of expression, massive censorship, undermining innovation and competition. All this language being used, and it took a little bit of time to look at this because the question was people overreacting to what's going on. I think, having spent a bit of time looking at it, nobody is overreacting to this. This is really pretty draconian, and Articles 11 and 13, I think the focus shouldn't be on just Article 13. They're both equally bad, and this has to be stopped.
What would you say, Mike, to people who say, well, this is only an EU directive, and of course we're leaving the European Union, so not a problem?
Well, I would say this because, of course, we were talking about the GDPR yesterday, the General Data Protection Regulations, and today Philip Hammond announced that the UK is going to have to remain closely aligned with EU rules following Brexit, and that means that GDPR will absolutely apply following Brexit. There's no question that this will also apply following Brexit. So this isn't going to protect us. Now, what's interesting, Brian, is the GDPR rules have come in as of the 25th of May, and we've all seen the flurry of emails asking us if we want to continue to receive messages or emails from various websites. And we've all seen the new banners on websites asking us to re-accept cookies from those websites. But what's already happened is that a number of news providers in the United States have decided that it's too onerous for them to implement the terms of the GDPR. And so they're simply blocking access to their websites to anybody that's in the European Union and the UK at the moment, because we're still in.
So we've got European union-wide censorship already coming in by default, really.
Well, absolutely, and they haven't even had to build a Chinese-style firewall. They've simply imposed regulations which foreign websites feel are too onerous, too expensive to implement, and so they're saying, to hell with the Europeans, we're not interested in their eyeballs. Well, that's a pretty drastic step.
Okay, well, we'd encourage our viewers and listeners to keep their eye on that one and report anything that you feel is of interest. Let's come to the BBC. I've been following for some months now the rise of the cartoon, which has been appearing on the BBC's news page. So this was a screenshot, in fact, from yesterday. But what did I notice? Well, I noticed amongst serious news items, we see the cartoon. So here's the cartoon, if we just highlight it down at the bottom of your screen. And the title is Boys on the Ice. Now, just as a general comment, I find it fascinating that your brain, your vision is trying to take in all of those news images. It's pulled to the pictures themselves. That's always very strong. But we'll say even for the BBC, we've got some serious stories there. But then there's a powerful image, which is in fact a cartoon. And this is very attractive. It pulls your attention. So let's have a look at what the BBC's up to here. If you go into it, this is highly animated. I find it particularly annoying because the screen scrolls in a particular way as you're trying to read the text. But it's the story of some boys in the 1800s. They stow away on a vessel. They're treated very cruelly. Eventually, they're put onto the ice. And I think it's 2 of them survive and the rest die. It's quite a harrowing story. You'd say it's very dark. At the moment, it's been of historical interest up in Scotland, and they've followed through on the story. So it's got some serious historical basis to it. But of course, it's now being presented as cartoon on the mainstream news. Now, if you get into this article and start to pay attention, you come to the Magic Torch Comics organisation. Because they are mentioned in the creation of this whole feature of Boys on the Ice. And as we normally do, we follow the evidence trail through. So here we are having a look at the Magic Torch Comics. And I'm going to say we've got a particularly unpleasant image with the caption, "There's more to life than books, you know, but not much more. Magic Torch Comics is a social enterprise. By purchasing our publications and merchandise, you can help support our work and projects while demonstrating your general excellence and good taste."
Sorry, is that a rabbit hanging by its neck?
Yeah, it is a rabbit hangs by its neck, and as we're going to see, sort of death and matters unpleasant seem to be of great interest to this Magic Torch comic. But this is the first thing that caught my eye, is that when you try and establish who these people are, it's not possible. So if you're going to contact them, you have to fill in one of the email boxes. You're not talking to a person. There are no names. It's just you contact us over the internet and we'll respond. Well, would I want to respond with these people? I'd like to know who they are, but this is a bit more of their imagery. And we're now on to the subject of witches. This is the Rowan Tree Legion, Witches at War, October 2016. And there seems to be a preoccupation with witches, because this is them tweeting out the cracking hashtag Paisley Witchcraft comics created in our Team Up folk comic workshops. So they're very big on witches. They're big on hanging rabbits. There's an sort of element of nastiness and death. BBC thinks a lot of them. So we get to the end of the BBC article. It says the Stowaways graphic novel was originally created by Magic Torch Comics and Ardgowan Primary School, Greenock. It was created as part of the Heritage Inverclyde, a Quest for Learning programme, an Inverclyde Council project delivered by Inverclyde Community Development Trust and funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund. And then certain people are given acknowledgement, including for some of the images. And because the story goes from Scotland over to Newfoundland, you've got people there identified as having input from Newfoundland. But what is this all about? Well, it just gets more interesting, because if we have a look at two of the individuals mentioned there, we've got this gentleman, Stephen Mulvey. He was the editor of the project, and the other gentleman here is Paul Kearley. Let's bring him on screen. He was involved in production. So Stephen Mulvey, assistant editor at BBC Digital Current Affairs, where I run the writer's desk, Russian speaker trying to learn Spanish. And the other gentleman is a BBC journo, being creative with photos and sound on the BBC News website. My comment on this is this news, Mike, or is this the creation of stories? I'm not quite sure what's going on, but we followed some of the tweets through. So this is Magic Talk Comics retweeting Trust Elder, whoever that is. A picture's worth 1,000 words. True #dementia care stories come to life through cartoons. So now we've got into a particularly mucky area, I think. We've got people in serious places in their lives, medical conditions, but we're now going to support that with cartoons. And we'll bring in this one as well. They're retweeting the History Press. And we've got another hanging. The notorious pirate William Kidd was hanged for murder and 5 counts of piracy. So we've got anonymous comics dealing in dementia and death and mental health, buried into the BBC as if it was news. Try this one, bringing rebellion into the classroom. So here's Magic Talk Comics retweeting the Scottish Book Trust. It says, on the most rebellious day of the year, we're launching our rebel writing campaign for schools. Here's how to inspire your pupils to start sharing their rebellious tales. Now, we could take it the light-hearted view. This is just children playing with rebellious stories. But I think there's many teachers out there who would say they've got a big enough problem keeping order in classrooms without encouraging the children to be rebellious. But we'll leave it to our viewers and listeners to make their mind up on that one. This is a bit more of the detail of that book trust, because it's got mental health benefits. Scotland is facing a mental health and wellbeing crisis. 1 in 3 people suffer from mental illness each year. The number of people with dementia is set to double. And they say here that, for example, reading can reduce stress. Okay, that's fine. But then we've got reading fiction can model ways of coping with alienation or problems at school, work, or in relationships. So now it's not just reading, this is reading in order to help reframe people.
Yes.
Mike, I'm going to bring that word in. But they're working for a Scotland where everyone has an equal opportunity to thrive, no matter what their background. And then who are they working with? Alzheimer's Scotland, Millennium Cohort Study, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, Reading for Change. So we're getting a bit of a clue here as to what's going on. Save the Children, University of Sussex, Mind Lab Research. So this is not just about bringing books to children. This has got a highly political undertone, I'm going to say, Mike, where clearly they are looking at bringing change into society via the reading habits of children.
Yeah, but if we're talking about University of Sussex Mind Lab research, we're also looking at how that change is implemented, what types of books provide the right type of change, what types of books don't provide the right type of change. So this is an academic research project as well.
Indeed. So let's have a look in a bit more detail here. Here's the Scottish Book Trust. Lots of information, encourage people to look at it, of course. Let's bring in some of the people. We've got here Keir Bloomer, the chair, former Director of Education for Clackmannanshire Council, chair of the Tapestry Partnership, a leading organisation, Teachers Professional Development, Educational Committee of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. So, okay, this man seems to have an education background. I'd like to know a little bit more. But let's bring in this one. We've got Andy Marchant. He works with financial services companies, management consultants and charities on business plans. Previously managing director and marketing director at Aegon, Direct Line, Royal Bank of Scotland, experiences in strategy. So how does this link in with children's books?
Not quite so clear, is it?
Not quite so clear. Well, what about this man? We've got James Saville, Director of People Operations and Systems, UK Government Department for International Development. So he's been DFID for the past 5 years. His team were Scottish Human Resources Network Team of the Year for their response to the Ebola crisis. So he jumps from that to books, but he's also worked for HBOS PLC, the financial services and oil and gas sectors. So this man is a sort of international corporatist, now apparently helping children with their reading. Or we've got Catherine Smith, former head of marketing at RBS, consultant with KPMG, but she's a member of the executive board, BBC Scotland. So a bit of a coincidence. And we'll bring in the last one here. I think this lady's Norwegian. She's had a master's degree in comparative literature, but she started her marketing career in Google's EMEA headquarters in Dublin. When I look at these people, they're not just there to help young children with their reading skills. This is bringing in a whole layer of political and cultural change. This is the sort of stuff that George Soros would back.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, you mentioned Ebola, Brian, and that's quite appropriate because Public Health England are involved in the Ebola crisis that's building in Congo at the moment. So a couple of weeks ago, the Democratic Republic of Congo declared a new outbreak of Ebola virus, and this is the country's 9th outbreak. So they, World Health Organization and others have gone in response. So the UK Public Health Rapid Support Team has the capability apparently to rapidly deploy public health experts at 48 hours notice to strengthen in-country response, curtail the spread of disease and ultimately save lives. And so the deployment was in response to a call, as I say, from the World Health Organization's Global Outbreak Alert and Response Network. Public health risk in the UK regarding the current Ebola outbreak is negligible to very low. That's similar to the public health risk to Novichok, of course. As the deployment progresses, it will continue to provide support and share expertise with partners in the Democratic Republic of Congo to strengthen the health system beyond the immediate response. So I presume, Brian, they've gone with their supply of baby wipes.
Baby wipes, yeah.
And we'll just remind everybody once again, of course, that what Public Health England's response to the Novichok crisis was, and that here it is here. As we scroll down, we find that they say that you need to wipe yourself down with cleansing or baby wipes should you have any risk of contamination. So clearly that's probably going to be the case in Congo as well. I just want to remind everybody or point everybody at this 21st Century Wire article by Dilyana Gutencheva, WMD America, Inside the Pentagon Global Bioweapons Industry. And of course, she is talking about the various bioweapons, what apparently or appear to be bioweapons, I can't even think of the word at the moment, but facilities, let's call them, in various parts of the world. And indeed, she's talking about Ebola virus in the course of that article. So go and look at that article, and perhaps we should be asking ourselves why this latest outbreak has occurred.
Yes.
Now, Gav the Chav, our friend Gavin Williamson, was meeting his colleague, the Bruneian Defence Minister, to discuss the close defence ties between the UK and Brunei. Now, what's this all about? Well, of course, Brunei, well, let's just give people a map to remind people where it is. It's down there, very close to China, South China Sea. Very important part of the world at the moment for obvious reasons. And of course, it's well, we might say it's our last permanent place in the Far East. I think that's about right, isn't it? And what's interesting, we were talking about Poland inviting the Americans in to Poland yesterday and potentially paying them up to $2 billion for the privilege of a US occupation of Poland. Well, in fact, this seems to be the case in the relationship between Brunei and the UK, because Brunei pays the United Kingdom for the 1,000 strong force that is based there. So we don't need to worry as taxpayers, but it's, 2,226 square miles is a relatively small part of the world, but strategically extremely significant.
Yeah. Well, I can say it has been for many years, Mike, and of course the military have been very closely tied in with Brunei, so that hasn't changed, but the fact that all of this money is now invested in it, and of course originally we had a whole fleet operating out of Hong Kong in order to patrol South China Seas. Now we've got this huge base, but we don't actually have any ships of significance. Now, many people think I'm being a bit cruel here on Britain's military, but I think we've got to be realistic. Whatever the government is saying about our military capability, the facts are that the Royal Navy is in a perilous state at the moment with the massive cuts in the numbers of ships and the condition of those ships. But all of a sudden we need this new base facility, Mike. Extremely interesting.
Yes. Now, yesterday we were talking about the DSTL space program, and we showed a couple of the slides from a presentation by the DSTL on the UK's future space defence and security potential. And Alex Thompson made the remark that the language used in these slides was very Royal Air Force in nature. And so I just thought it was amusing that, Gavin Williamson, in a press release today, well, actually the press release was released last week, but it was updated today, and he was making the point that that the command and control for the UK's defence space would be based with the RAF, so they are going to be running this. So Alex absolutely bang on the money with that one. Now let's move on to Georgia, and Georgia has severed relations with Syria apparently because Syria has recognized South Ossetia as an independent and also Abkhazia as well, so Georgia says it will sever diplomatic ties with Syria over its decision to recognize the breakaway Georgian regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia as independent countries. Apparently, there are diplomatic relations operating in both directions. And so I just ran this by Alex Thompson today because I was interested to know whether he felt that this was just the Russians, stirring the pot a little bit, having a bit of fun here. And his response was, well, it is that, but it's also a way of indicating that the Syrians know how Georgian troops have been have been crucial in keeping the Middle East sort of reliant on NATO, particularly in Iraq and Afghanistan, and also a way of aligning Syria with Putin's warning at the 2006 Munich Security Conference that if the West recognized the independence of Kosovo, that the Russian Federation would respond accordingly, and by recognizing both these regions of Georgia. So that seems to have happened, in fact. Now, North Korea. Today, Kim Jong-un was meeting Sergei Lavrov, and they are having a discussion about the future supposedly denuclearization of North Korea and also peace on the Korean Peninsula. Lavrov has said that there's a six-party mechanism, which already began in 2003, which encompasses North Korea, South Korea, Russia, China, Japan, and the United States, that remains in effect, despite what the mainstream media has been trying to push with regard to the Trump-Kim summit, apparent failure. And Lavrov said that he said that Russia's support for the developing relationship between North and South Korea, and also the one between North Korea and Washington, would continue, and he said he was hopeful that the summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un would not result in ultimata when it eventually happens. Of course, that's not all that's going on, because Kim Jong-un's second in command is in New York, met Mike Pompeo yesterday to discuss the North Korean summit. Donald Trump tweeted this out yesterday, saying, "We've put together a great team for our talks with North Korea. Meetings are currently taking place concerning the summit and more." Kim Yong-chol, the Vice Chairman of North Korea, is heading to New York. A solid response to my letter. Thank you. And I would imagine that the letter that he sent, which did get the response, has been pretty disappointing to those that would continue to like to see this summit not take place.
I think there's a lot of people who like to see that, Mike. Well, let's move on to matters closer to home. And we're going to come in with this article, which somebody highlighted and sent through to us. So we're going back a bit in the start of the story, 2017, but this is Nottinghamshire Live, beg your pardon. Woman admits indecent assault of boy over 30 years ago. And it says that Miriam Bamkin of Ripley Road, Belper, is due to appear at Nottingham Magistrates Court on the 27th of April 2017, charged with 3 offences of indecent assault on a male under 16 and 1 offence of indecent assault on a male over 16 years old. The charges, which were brought following an investigation by officers from Nottinghamshire Police Historical Abuse Unit, Operation Equinox, relate to offences that are alleged to have happened in the late 1980s at Amberdale Children's Home, Stapleford. Now, the update on the story is that the woman's admitted the indecent assault of a boy over 30 years ago. She's going to be sentenced. It says she was granted bail after pleading guilty to the offence. But the bottom comment is the key one. The background to the case was not disclosed in court, but the offence took place in Nottinghamshire. So we've got the court now censoring information to do with the abuse of youngsters. And this was the key point that the viewer picked up, that this case is being censored. Now let's have a look at the woman herself. We know the story is absolutely real. This is the Health and Care Professions Tribunal Service. So it's talking about a social worker, gives a registration number, an interim order application, and it's on a Mrs. Miriam Ghislaine Bamkin. So why is she of significance? Well, here is the Children's Social Care team for the Nottingham area, and we can highlight her name here. There she is for Ashfield Fostering. So this is the group of people within the particular area responsible for safeguarding children. And now we can see that we have, I'm going to say, at least one abuser actually working within the safeguarding team. And this is immensely dangerous and very significant. If we bring in Melanie Shaw at this point, we can just say that it's interesting that the abuses that were taking place are in the right time frame for when Melanie Shaw was experiencing abuse. And of course, Melanie was warning particularly about what was happening in Nottinghamshire Children's Home in that time frame. Now, we're not saying this lady was directly involved with Melanie Shaw. What we are pointing out is that if you have a child abuser buried within the children's social care system, what is this? The poacher breeding rabbits, or this is the sweet lover in the sweetie shop? And this has very dangerous potential here. So let's remind ourselves that Melanie Shaw, having tried to speak out, was put in prison. She's still in prison. She doesn't know a release date yet. There is now talk from people fairly close to Melanie that she seems to be, quote, a black prisoner. And this means that somebody that's in the prison system, but they're not actually being held in accordance with the law. They're simply being held within a black system. And why would that be? To protect child abusers in the British political state. And of course, Theresa May was Home Secretary at the time that Melanie was sentenced, and Theresa May has done absolutely nothing to date to do anything to free her. But I think this is very, very significant that we are now starting to see yet another example of child abusers within the children's protection system. So when we're seeing stories about gangs, yes, those gangs have been involved in the abuse, but if we have abusers buried in the very system that is supposed to be running child protection, we're in a very perilous position. And of course, we know from Nottingham itself and other areas in the country that the police were victimising the victims of abuse and allowing the perpetrators to go free. Perhaps we should ask the question, was that because we also have child abusers buried in Britain's police forces as well? So a lot of questions to ask, and I think this highlights even more attention on events that have taken place around Tommy Robinson recently, where we have seen that ongoing trial to do with child abuse also coming under reporting restrictions by the judge. Is it just because of the Asian gangs that are being mentioned, or is this because the British state is starting to get very scared? People are now uncovering the abuse ever closer to Westminster and seats of power in the establishment. I think David Scott will have more to say on this tomorrow. That's the end of the news for today. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. A very big thank you to those of you who've recently taken out subscriptions. And as always, we're going to say, if you're a viewer that has still not got a subscription, or perhaps you haven't made a donation to the UK column, please do, because we can only do what we do with your support.
Yeah, I was just going to say a massive thank you to one person in particular who made a very generous donation. The night before the Media on Trial event, I had the pleasure of meeting him at the event on Sunday. So thank you for that very much.
And I'll just end by saying, having watched the news myself from home yesterday, what a wonderful situation where we can now see that viewers and listeners are starting to act on the information that UK Column is putting out, and they are starting to do whatever's necessary to call, get in contact, write to MPs, put them on the spot, get the information and the letters out. This is exactly what needs to be done. So thank you very much for that. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.